Okay. So, that's what I'm going to present now is an attempt to write back a property relation to land from one of ownership to that of usership, while going through several registers from the legal to the linguistic. 2 years ago, as we started a process of communalization of a so-called wasteland, it's this, here. It's this tiny plot in a previous quarry that you see here in the picture, located in the north of Lebanon. Together with Soils Permaculture Cooperative and lawyer Maya Dreide, we found ourselves delving simultaneously into the rehabilitation of the damaged soil as decades of quarrying had transformed the soil and the subsoil and disintegrated them. As much as we were delving into a history of property in its various juridical forms. So we saw ourselves attempting to understand soil formations and legal formations concurrently. From this tiny plot, the history of transformation of property over centuries could be recalled. And from this tiny plot, we could understand how land was configured in the Levant region during the Ottoman Empire and variably within other geographies in the Ottoman space, as well as understanding its tumultuous historical transformations. So without glorifying nor diabolizing that historical moment, and there's a lot to be said about that, but in this particular situation, we were looking for possible forms of communal non-ownership that would be legally binding. The whole point was to attempt to revert the status of private property to one of non-property, so neither public nor private. Working with the existing legal forms in order to secure it as non-property on the long term. Okay. And this particularly means unowned, non-exchangeable, and non-transmittable. And yes, this status still exists, despite decades of privatization that started in the middle of the 19th century and was institutionalized with the property register during the French mandate in the case of Lebanon, beginning of the 1920s. Of course, this came with surveying a big part of the territory and linking it to the universal X and Y for the purpose of cartographic production, and to exchange the Ottoman title deeds that followed a descriptive form to exchange them for maps. A general protocol of usership was drafted that would be eventually annexed to the legal document and would serve as its internal regulation. Here you can see some headlines from the protocol, eventually subsections and more detailed agreement of collective management will be ready soon. The core principle is that the land would be used by people who do not own a land. At the moment, this would be 3 families living nearby, so living near the previous quarry. They would benefit from its timar, usufruct, and would be able to sell the surplus. So timar, usufruct, is the name of the system of usership that prevailed in the Ottoman time, taking into consideration its changes and fluctuations throughout almost 500 years. It's a tax levy system on usufruct, hence the name timar. In principle, there was no automatic hereditary appropriation of landed property, but of course the reality is always more complex. So we first turned to the most obvious form of non-ownership that is neither private nor public, which is the masha'. Technically, the masha' or the musha' is a form of communal property. We can call it common. In Lebanon, this form survived the Ottoman land reforms and the institutionalization of private property, unlike what happened in Palestine, for example, where Zionist settler colonialism accelerated the privatization of masha amongst other forms of land and property. So it's a legal status that sits under the category of the Miri land, Amiri, referring to the Sultan. But it's also a practice that refers to a communally tended land and cultivated, so communally tended and cultivated land. And every village in that region of Mount Lebanon, and more broadly in Lebanon, still has its masha amongst other common land. The custodian of the masha or the musha are the villagers, the users. And it is, now organized more recently through municipalities. And there is an inherited knowledge as to how the masha transformed from being a communally tended land to being used for pasturing and where the harvest is stocked or piled. Masha is derived from man sha'a, which literally means what is common and also what is known. On the other hand, milik means property in Arabic. The etymology of the word is a composition of two words, ma laka, which would be literally translated into what yours, hinting at its omitted pronoun, huwa. Ma huwa laka. That would be translated into what it is yours or what is yours. This omission of the pronoun that indicates one's property is necessary in order to become a malik, with an extension of the alif, the a, an owner. The removal of the huwa, which points to the specific object of possession, is a necessary removal, makes the owner sovereign over their possession, crowning them king, malak, or sovereign over their property. It is a necessary deletion that makes the milik, property, possible, in language first, but in the act of owning that inevitably erases another possibility, that of not owning, or that of non-property, la mulkiya. Erasure does not mean disappearance. One still hears the huwa in the word milik, despite its omission. It still echoes in our ears as it is essential to the act of owning. Just like the obliterated possibilities of non-ownership still resonate despite their necessary erasure in order to make property possible. Ownership, in a modern legal sense, is haunted by a history of a different relationship to land, that of usership. Back to the plot of land that is being rehabilitated. We finally decided to turn the land into a social waqf, which is the status of a land that is halted. It literally means stopped, blocked, frozen, which implies that it can neither be exchanged, nor sold, nor transmitted over the period of 99 years. And here's a picture of the land that's being rehabilitated now. As Daniel Loic points in his book, The Abuse of Property, talking about the reorganization or the question of reorganization of production according to need, and maybe here I'll need some music actually to read the code. Only once the private ownership of production is abolished, according to Marx, can the needs of others become the actual reason for my production. Only then is it possible to organize labor as social labor in the emphatic sense. This, in turn, corresponds to a more comprehensive, fuller possibility of using the world, something that Marx called the emancipation of the senses. The abolition of private property is therefore the complete emancipation of all human senses and qualities. Finally, looking at this herd of sheep crossing property, in their case, they do have the right to passage, actually, so all the land for them is masha. They do not trespass, they just pass through. And yeah, perhaps that's a good image to end with. Thank you.